There's what happened, and then there's what you're making it mean. And those are two very different things, right? So there's the facts, and then there's the interpretation. I always compare the three responses you have in stressful situations. And I call it the rabbit, the deer, and the cat, right? So the rabbit will freeze. We'll just do nothing. We'll just sit there, right? And the deer will flee, right? It will take flight. It will run away from the danger, right? And then the cat, even if the cat gets a shock, right? The cat will leap up into the air. But in that leap, it will turn and face the danger. So it will be ready to fight no matter how much shock or how much danger is in that situation. I know it's there. I'm going to be aware of it, but I'm still taking this damn thing on, right? And so that hormonal concoction feeds you, right? Welcome to the RunFORM podcast. I'm Bobby McGee, running mechanics expert.
And I'm Matt Pendola, your run-specific strength coach.
Matt and I have been working together for almost a decade on some of the top athletes in the world, and we've decided to share that process with you guys.
Welcome, everyone, to the RunFORM podcast. I, as always, am your host, Matt Pendola, along with the legendary, the only Bobby McGee. Today, we have our very special guest back, Ryan Peel. If you listened to our past podcast, we talked all about Ryan's prep work for the Chicago Marathon. He ran it, he did it, he accomplished it. We're back today to talk about how it actually went for him and what we plan to do in the future. So without further ado, Ryan, how are you, brother? Thanks for being back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, guys. Good to see you. I'm doing great today. Thanks.
Ryan, it's good to have you back. You know, we haven't been communicating for a while since you ran Chicago, right? Because that period of time was done. And I think it's a good place to start is how many weeks did we have to prepare, right? So we jumped in with 12 weeks of preparation time, with some background work. You were generally fit, but you weren't specifically run fit, and definitely not specifically marathon fit. So it'd be important for us to talk about that. And then, of course, you decided, look, I'm heading off to Paris. And so you kind of started your training, on another continent, trying to figure out the streets of France and getting your long runs and things in there. So let's start with that. Your feeling about having 12 weeks to get ready for a big marathon.
I think it was 16, or maybe I started with Matt. I think the total is about 17. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, 17 weeks. And, really, Bobby, I think we're skipping past the beard here. I want to talk about the beard for a second because, Ryan, you haven't seen the beard. I haven't really. I've been gone in Kona, and I wanted to just see what you thought. Did you recognize Bobby today?
He's looking good. I think he looks great.
Yeah, I think he wanted to look like you.
Lost half of my... I did, I lost half of my beard after the race. It was getting too much. I had too much gray coming through and stuff. So I took mine down and gave it to Bobby, it looks like.
Yeah, no, I don't have the problem with the gray. I'm just, I'm good to go.
I like it. Looks very wise, almost Yoda-ish. So I like it. It's a good look, Bobby. But all right, back to the show.
I don't want to be Yoda. I want to be Gandalf. So
yeah, Yoda was he had the scraggly, kind of white hairs, but he didn't have the full on beard. So that's very true. There's power in the beard. I'm starting to work on my stubble for the winter now. So
okay,
I'll catch
there
up.
You go.
I'll catch up. All right, back to the show. Back to you, Ryan.
Sounds good. Yeah, so about 17 weeks. I started with you, Matt, probably the first week or so. And then we brought Bobby on, and he got our running schedule, kind of the basic outline of it. And then, I did announce, hey, guys, I already have, some family plans and a few vacations. I travel a lot. And so the first thing was we started out in Paris. We actually did Paris and England. We were there for, I guess, 10 or 12 days or something. And we were only a few weeks into training. So you guys were really good at kind of looking at my flight schedule, Bobby moved around some runs so that I had, on my travel days, maybe I wasn't doing very much. Maybe woke up and did a little run before my flight. And then in the airport, Matt had me doing some movements to kind of, stay somewhat fresh. But it was a challenge. And truth be told, Matt had me scheduled to do some strength work in my hotel. And that was really difficult to stick to. I didn't have time on most of the days to get any of that done. But I did make sure I got all the runs in. And a lot of, not just the runs, but I think we substituted some running for knowing that I would be doing so much tourist walking. And so we incorporated that in.
I'm loving this because we do want to have that transparency, letting people know that it is a struggle to stay on the plan. And Bobby, a long time ago, taught me the difference in our sort of verbiage when we are, as coaches, writing up our workout of the day, so to speak, versus plans, right? Versus training. And we plan in pencil because we do need to use that eraser, but this happens all the time. So I love that you mentioned that, Ryan, because it's not a perfect buildup. It never is. And that is something that we just adjust to. And at the time, to be clear, I want people to understand, you said 17 weeks. The first few weeks before Bobby came on is when we really worked on your motor control, your mobility, those movement improvement evaluations we started with. That is what, again, we have on our website. It's free to anybody to use. You went through the same things. And we really wanted to get that established first, which you did. So what we decided when you were gone in Paris is, hey, Ryan's super motivated. He wants to do this strength work while he's gone. I set up all this programming for you, absolutely knowing you probably 100% most likely wouldn't do it. And that is just fine. That is just fine. So I just wanted to point that out because when you got back, we did get after the strength. We had almost a full 4 months for Chicago with Bobby at that time. So we were well set up and we stuck mostly to the plan, but it wasn't perfect.
Yeah. And I think another interesting thing to look at on top of that was looking at the macro of the schedule versus the actual execution, right? So the idea was in week 1 and 2, we would sort of complete base, making the assumption based on, Ryan's reporting and so on, that would be like the final 2 weeks of a 6-week general running phase, right? And we went for an approach where every third week would be more like a recovery week. So that, that week in France was supposed to be that recovery week. So, that was on the plus side. But then we had to go into that strength threshold phase, that zone 4 phase to start with, and then another recovery week. And then we were going to do more of the threshold phase and the strength phase, but maintaining the more maintenance on the strength side, more emphasis on the threshold side. And then a recovery week before that final tempo build. So things were still a little bit compressed at that point in time. And when we look at the results, I think that will show some things that we can do better next time around, right? And I think the important thing about this particular podcast, Ryan's willingness to come on, but for all three of us to be real vulnerable, because I think this is important for people to see. They're like, yeah, okay, there's this marathon coach and there's the strength and conditioning coach that specializes in endurance, right? And there's an athlete with a significant amount of talent, right? Already. So people can relate to this and have a look at the details. The beauty of what the Stride Power Meter gives you a nice granular look of what happened. So we've done some analysis. We've looked at the first 17 miles. Why did those go so well? Why were those right on target? And then we've looked at mile 20 to mile 26, right? And funnily enough, I take out the little data from the 0.2 at the end, because everybody has the pride and the guts and the courage to sprint that last, 160 meters or so, and it makes the numbers look great right at the finish there, right? So, but that's the fun part I'm going to look to is, as you alluded to, Matt, is that the reality of marathon preparation and just that understanding. I've had this privilege of working for many years with African runners, all the way up to, world number ones for the marathon at that point in time. And the realization that, yes, they train a whole lot more, but they rest even more. And that's the one thing that the person who has a job and a family and a life cannot replicate. They cannot replicate the 10, 11 hours of sleep, and they cannot replicate, the nutrition and the treatment and the weekly massages, and all those things are really, really hard to replicate for the average runner, especially runners that have the ability to go quite quick, right? Because they have that cardiovascular background like Ryan does.
Yeah, Ryan, I think with somebody like you too, with your training during COVID, I wanted to talk a little bit about your expectations for the Chicago Marathon versus what you did during COVID, because I think, again, Bobby's point of transparency, we had some expectations there. You were in a position during COVID where you were getting actually a lot of rest, a lot more rest, because things were shut down. And we were now going into training during a completely different and more hectic time for you as well. So I'd like to touch on that, your experience in your ability to be able to do that versus now. I know for myself during COVID, I got in the best shape of my adult life, really, right? There was plenty of
Yeah.
time. There was plenty of recovery.
Well,
I slept as long as I wanted to every morning, right? So made a big difference for me, and I know for you as well. So why don't we talk about that a little bit and how that changed for you in this buildup?
Yeah, totally. So coming into Chicago, my my official PR in the distance was that year of COVID. I was in the Boston Marathon for 2020 and had been training for it starting in the late fall or going into the winter of 2019. And so I was quite fit when the time came, when the planned race start was going to happen. But unfortunately with COVID, it got postponed. So like you mentioned, yeah, I had a little more flexibility in time. I was still busy with work, but working from home a little bit more. It was a different landscape back then. And so I continued training through basically that whole year. And ultimately I ran, I think Boston Virtual that year was in September. And I ran 2:51 and change. I don't remember the exact seconds, but that was my official, unofficial PR. But it wasn't at an official, it wasn't at Boston, in Boston, or Chicago. It wasn't at a formally organized race. It was me and another buddy in Reno that run together, a real talented Reno runner, a guy named Brian Solomon, and I decided we were going to run remotely together. And so we kind of linked together some different Strava segments or some different runs that we had done and came up with a basic framework for a course. And then we got on our bikes, and both of us independently wearing our GPS watches, measured the course. So yeah, it wasn't it wasn't the same as running an official course, but I was in good shape that year. Like I said, I'd trained all through the winter, all through the spring. I kept training through the summer. Somehow I showed up healthy. I was probably in my best running shape of my life at that point, several years younger than I am now. And I ran the 2:51 and change. So I will say the course was also, maybe the course wasn't measured in the same way. I feel like it was the right distance, but it was also at altitude. But the course was different. It didn't have the Newton Hills and all that late in the mile. It was a little different type of course. So it's hard to compare apples for apples, of course. And on that day in Reno, we had a real bad forest fires going on in Northern California. Air quality was terrible. Normally probably would have pushed off to another date. But being that it was, I think they give you a week to do your Boston virtual, and this was like maybe the last day you could run it. So we just decided to do it, and it went pretty well.
I didn't know about the smoke part. That's interesting. And, just so I understand, though, you said Boston took this as an official time, though?
Yeah, so they gave you a basic framework for submitting your results. And so we followed the format that Boston required, and we uploaded our results, and they were accepted. And then of course we had, our GPS, our Strava segment, or our, however we did it at the time. Boston set up a specific way of doing that. We submitted it, and yeah, it was printed in their official results for that year. So that's my marathon PR. But at the same time, I never had an official race where I went under 3 hours. So then I decided I was going to run Boston again the next year, and trained really well that following year in 2021. And about a week, no, I take that back. The weekend, the day before I was supposed to fly to Boston for the race. It was again held in the fall that year. I think it was September again, possibly October. But just the day before we were set to fly with my family, my daughter's class at school was sent home in quarantine because they had a couple kids in the class with COVID. My daughter didn't have it, but because she was potentially exposed, at that point we were asked to quarantine. So I had to make the tough decision: am I going to fly to Boston by myself? We planned it as a family vacation, a family trip, and it was my birthday weekend, so it wasn't October. And I said, you know what? I just don't want to be away from my family. I know I put in a lot of hard work. I felt pretty fit, but I'm not going to run it this year. So I didn't run it in 2021. And then again, I tried it in 2022. So I went back. It was held in the spring of 22. And at that point, the training for several years for one marathon, I did start having some niggles and stuff like that. So I think maybe a month before the race, I had stopped being able to train hard because I was worried about showing up on race day injured. So I ran it in spring of 2022, and my time was 3:01:30 or something. I still didn't break 3 hours. So still, I had not officially broken 3 hours in an official marathon. And then at that point, I was overcooked, overtrained, kind of burnout. COVID had finished. Work was busier than ever, and I just got so bogged down with work. I quit running altogether, lost my mojo, and really, Matt, you and Bobby, you guys are kind of the ones bringing me back into the game here. So, so I don't think we've announced yet my official time in Chicago. Are we ready to do that, or?
Yeah, I think we're ready to do that, right?
Okay. So, or do you want me to kind of build first about how the race went, and then
keep building the suspense?
Keep building the suspense. Yeah.
Okay. So this year,
so before you go, let's quickly look at. Okay. So your official PR in an official race is 3:01, right?
Yeah,
and
that's right.
And that was run in Boston in your third attempt with this COVID disaster and birthdays and stuff like that. All right. So, and that 3:01 was set a year ago, basically, right?
That's right.
No, actually 18 months,
year and a
right?
half.
Because year and a half. Okay. Now continue. So we just want to, and then the other thing that I want to mention is would you mind telling our listeners again how old you are?
I wish my birthday was a couple years or a couple days earlier, because on October 8th, I was 44. And then on October 10th this year, I turned 45. It would have been in a whole new age bracket. But with the facts, yeah, I'm 45 now. I was 44 when I ran Chicago. And I did set a PR, but we'll wait to tell the listeners exactly what the time was until I get through the race.
Only age groupers want to be older, right? Like, yeah, that always cracks me up. Like we're always, oh, I wish I was a little older. We just want to be older so we can be in that next bracket. We're the only people who think that way.
That's true.
Except men in the 40 to 45 age group. It's such a brutal age group, right? They'd rather be 35 to 39 or 45 to 50, but that 40 to 45, everybody is just like, it's the toughest age group on the planet.
Yeah,
really
there's a lot of real talented guys.
Oh, this is fun. Yeah. And I'm sorry, Bobby, you were going to comment before too.
Yep. I was just going to say that it's so important, and I know most people know this, but it's so important to know these violent differences between these great big city marathons, right? So Chicago is flat as a pancake, right? Which for the average age group is a really hard run to do, especially if you don't have a rabbit or anything like that. It's really hard to concentrate because you have to generate your pace with every step. It's easy to lose focus in Chicago, you know. The second thing is, if you're running around about Ryan's pace, the crowds are a little thinner towards the end of the race, right? There's not so many packs on the road, although Ryan's experience was that it was reasonably busy, right? And then the difference between Chicago and Boston is massive because Boston has this net drop, quite a significant drop, right? And you speak about the hills of Newton, they're not terrible hills, especially for people who come from Reno, all right? But they come at an awful time in the race in terms of your energy expenditure, right? And then Boston doesn't require quite the level of aerobic conditioning that you would say need for a Chicago or, for a New York marathon, but you need this immense peripheral conditioning because all of this eccentric contraction of going down, down, down all the way. You have these legendary stories of people winning New York 9 times, right? And stepping off the course at 16 miles in Boston because they just cannot run another step. And you have somebody like Kipchoge just can't figure out Boston, right? Aerobically just magnificent, and then, has a really, really tough time running Chicago. From a peripheral standpoint, right? You quad failures and stuff like that. So it's important that people know that no 2 marathons are the same.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, Bobby, you talked about the flat course and that actually being harder to keep the pace. I talked to a lot of age groupers who were kind of disappointed with their Chicago times, actually. And I think, again, I'd kind of like to get your perspective on this because I was telling them, like, look, the pros, they have pacers, they have a different altogether experience with that. You're out there on your own more, and it's a lot harder to keep focus on that pace. But seemed to be a common theme that went around about the Chicago course. What are your feelings on that, Bobby?
Yeah, no. I think it comes down to the fact that the flat course is so relentless, right? So you look at, Ryan, you were hugely privileged to be in a race that produced a men's world record. And it was the first time since Chicago had a world record in many, many, many years, right? I think the last guy was Canucci, maybe in the previous century, right? That he ran the world record. So it's pretty cool that, that you were in that race. But a flat course, the weather conditions were perfect, right? It was a really nice course. It was a little bit of a breeze blowing, but it was for and against, so it wasn't really hurting you or overheating you. But it's that ability to focus, right? If you have a slightly rolling course or a slightly downhill course like Cal International or a lot of these other marathons, people tend to do better, even in Marine Corps and Grand Mars. Because they give the whole motor pattern and the musculature a chance to work against a little incline and then work a little downhill again and then work a little incline. And it's just really, really hard to focus on a flat course. And statistically, we've seen that the average runner tends to run a little better on a rolling course than they do run on a dead flat course.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Ryan, as far as your experience though and your expectations, I think that's another part that I really wanted to talk about and to delve into a little bit, because we want people to understand that the process and what you've gone through is really the value in this. But of course, we all want PRs. Now, we kind of officially got a PR, but unofficially we didn't. It's one of those scenarios where it's hard to say, right? You had a measured course that you had done with your compadre, and really it seems like maybe you even went 26.4. You don't know. Maybe it was just short of 26.2. We don't know 100% for sure. But let's just take it at the distance of 26.2 and say that we did not unofficially / officially get our PR, but we kind of did, right? But so what did you feel about that experience? Was that a big letdown for you not to have under, let's say, 251, or were your expectations that really just enjoyed the whole experience and this is now an official PR? What was your interpretation of this?
Yeah, so I want to ask of myself as much as I can get out, and so I'm always trying to set a lofty goal. And I came into this wanting 244.59. I would like to break 245. But I'm now 45 years old. I've never run that time before. But it's just a number that I had in my mind. And so part of me, obviously, I set a goal, I want to keep it. But the reality is I'm not a professional athlete. I have a full-time, busy career, 4 kids that are all active, and I'm just trying to squeeze it in. So to be honest with you, Matt, I'm really pleased with how my Chicago went. I'm proud of it. I feel like I put in the work. I know I put in a lot of hard work. And I had a great experience working with both of you guys. It was unique. It was different than anything I'd done before. I actually went into the race not knowing where I was gonna, or what splits I was gonna run. I was less confident in my own ability because I spent so much less time really running marathon pace. So I really leaned on Bobby to guide me and say, hey, Bobby, shoot me straight. Where do I need to run? How are we doing? And Bobby set me up kind of A, B, C goal. So A goal was 244.59. B goal was 247 or so. And then C was 249. And he gave me pace, kind of mapped out the pace, 5K pace, where I should be for, each A, B, and C goal. And not knowing and not having the utmost confidence that I was going to be able to run 244, I just, in my gut, I was like, I don't know if I have it, but hey, I'm not going to leave it off the table. But I'm going to go in and try to maybe start my race at that C goal pace. Maybe the first mile, I'm just going to go out and try to find an opening and create a little space because there's so many people there. So mile 1, whatever it is, I'm just going to get out there and then try to settle into maybe that C to B pace. And then as the race goes on, if I'm feeling good, obviously I'm going to try to dip below, but I didn't want to blow up. So I set out, race morning was exciting, was great. It was a little cold at the start. I didn't get up as far as I wanted to in my corral, so I started back quite a ways. In fact, 20 people ahead of me, I could see the 3-hour pace guy holding his little sign up. So I knew I had a challenging few miles in the beginning to get around all these people. But I jumped out there, used quite a bit of energy trying to bob and weave and find my lane. But I started the race. I think the first several miles I was in the 6:17 pace, and so I was definitely, I think my first 5K was 19:30. So I was in that B range that Bobby had set for me. And I fell into just a really nice, smooth, comfortable pace for a lot of miles. And it felt pretty good up through the halfway point. Maybe mile 15, I noticed that I was getting a little heavier and I was having to work a little harder to maintain the pace. So I never did think that a negative split was going to happen. But I think I came into the halfway point at 122 or 124, Bobby. Do you recall?
Yep. I can just quickly look that up.
And so I think it was 124. So I just knew in the back of my mind, hey, I still have that B goal possibly on my radar. But I felt good. I felt strong. I think mile 18, as expected, you start feeling. I started getting some rough points here and there, but really not for too long. I think not for more than a half a mile, and then I would feel good again. I maybe hit 3 or so of those low points throughout the final 10 miles.
You were you were just under 124 at halfway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, a good 248, 247 and change.
Yeah, and the running felt smooth. The course felt good. I felt healthy and strong. But I started losing some springiness as the later miles came in, and I just tried to hang in there from slowing down too much. I think all my miles up until maybe the last 4, or 4 of the last 6 anyway, were sub 7-minute miles. I think there was 4 miles in there where I was right at the 7-minute mark. Lost a little bit of time. I ended up finishing 2:53 and some seconds. I didn't check the race website for the official result. My watch might have said, what was it, 8? Okay. 2:53:09. 2:53:09. And, I was elated at the finish, knowing that now, hey, I have an official record under 3 hours, obviously. Yeah, I didn't hit my A goal, but it felt pretty good. It was a great day. I was proud about what I was able to put together. I didn't blow up. I was able to sustain, for the first really 16 miles or so. I was pretty close on pace, and I definitely think I still have that 244 number in me. I'm not giving up on it. But
yeah. So I don't know if you noticed there was a podcast that we did, and the clip that they chose for Instagram got like a stupid amount of likes, because in that I mentioned this concept of, if you put all of your eggs in a time goal basket, you are missing 90+% of the whole process, right? So, the joy of working with Matt and myself, and our joy of working with you, and the fact that you didn't blow up, you just had a slow burn towards the end, right? And the fact that I'm an old school coach, right? And I'm really anal about you run a USA track and field certified course, or you run a certified marathon course. They don't give that guy a 2-hour marathon, right? What was it, 2 hours and 35 seconds? They don't give him that time if they don't get complete confirmation from a 3-month effort of measuring that course, right? So we know that course is accurate, right? So you actually set a massive PR, right? You basically went, like almost 10 minutes faster than your official PR, right? And that official PR was set, a couple of years ago, and you at that age group changing age. So I just, I look at the data, and the data are classic in some ways, but in other ways, it really reflects the work that you and Matt have done over and above the training that I prescribed to you. So some of your experiences was the mileage you might have felt that the mileage was a little less than you would normally do, right? And that kind of thing. But we got you to the race healthy and so on. But do tell people, in that context, the story about your wife getting ill like the day before and that kind of stuff, and then what happened to you, and then I'll add to that with the immune
Right.
system compromise. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in all these years since COVID started, I've managed to avoid it this whole time. I have a pretty good immune system, and I've always just I almost got to the point where I was getting cocky about it. Like, I can't get COVID. So a day or two before the race, my wife just wasn't feeling 100%. I guess the day before Chicago, she was just kind of feeling like maybe she was getting a cold or something. And then on race day, she really wasn't feeling hot. She was just sucking it up because she didn't want to overshadow my day. So she didn't even really say too much, but she had a tickle in her throat and she was getting congested and stuff. And ultimately after the race, she's like, "Man, I think I'm coming down with something." So the following day, we returned home, and ultimately she found out that she had COVID, and lo and behold, me finishing the marathon and wearing down my immune system. I think just the wrong place, the wrong time, and I think finally I was brought down. First cold or anything I've had in a few years, and so the last several days I've been not terrible symptoms. It just feels like I have a pretty good head cold. But yeah, I think I finally might have got COVID.
Oh my goodness. Yep. So, just for our listeners, just there was a great study done in South Africa after two ultra marathons. One was 35 miles and one was 55 miles. And they literally tested thousands of people actually, and found that, the average person's immune system is suppressed by 600% after running a marathon. Okay. And so your likelihood of catching something is very, very high. So a number in excess of 75%, I don't know exactly what the number was in the study, but in excess of 75% of people will get some form of upper respiratory tract infection in the week after they've run the marathon. So as you said, it was a perfect storm. And you probably got a dose of COVID from dozens of quadrants, not just your poor wife, right? So
Totally, that's true.
Yeah,
It might not have been her, yeah, and maybe I got something different. I didn't feel bad enough. I ended up not even taking a test. I just stayed home for the long weekend here, or the last. I back to work finally yesterday, but I took a few days off of work and just stayed home and rested up.
Okay. Well, with that, let's just have a look at some of the numbers, right? So you wore a stride device, and we got some really, really interesting numbers. So what I did was, if you look at your power, right, it was for the whole marathon, your power was 329 watts, right? And the prescription that I gave you beforehand with the data we have it available was you want to run about 315 to 320, right? Was what we spoke about before the marathon. But if I analyze the power further and look at the first 17 miles, your power was 334. And your power over from mile 20 to mile 26, your power was 314. So that's significant, dropping from 334 to 314 with that last 6 miles, right? And when you compare that to the pace, your pace over your average pace for the entire run was, let me just quick look here. Your average pace for the entire run was 6:35s, right? But your pace for the first 17 miles was 6:24, which was 2:48 pace, right? So that was right on your B goal, all right? But your pace for from 20 to 26, that last 6 miles was 6:57, which was 3:02 pace. Again, very interesting to look. But then when you look at the granular data, what really starts looking really nice is your cadence for the whole run was 180, right? Your cadence for the first 17 miles was 181, so not much difference. But your cadence for that last 6 miles was 178. So you're really starting to lose your rhythm, and as your muscle endurance started to fail, right? heart rate was quite exceptional, which meant that Matt had done his work. You guys had done good work there, because your average heart rate for the whole run was 169.6, so 170, and your heart rate for the first 16 miles was 168. But I just want people to bear in mind, you've got a very low heart rate, and your first mile was only 124, right? So if you take it will be a little higher if you drop that 124, because you were 163 by the second mile, and then once you settled 167, 168, 170, with a little blip of a 174 there at mile 12. Anyway, so that was like interesting to look at, that you had a lower heart rate for the first 17 miles than you had for the last 6 miles, which was 171. But then the big telling one was that ground contact time, right? So you have a very, very high level ground contact time, under 200 milliseconds. So for the first 17 miles, your ground contact time was 195, okay? Whereas for the last 6 miles, your ground contact was 208, so you were really heavy on the ground, and you could feel that. You could feel that, then,
absolutely.
that your leg spring stiffness had gone, right? So your leg spring stiffness, first 17 miles, 13, and last 6 miles, 12.6, sort of 12.5, somewhere in there. And then what else did I want to look at? Cadence, with something as innate as cadence, right? Something as stuck in the human. You have a reasonably high cadence. You were 181 for the first 17 miles, 178 for the last 6 miles, right? And with your average at 180, so you can see you dropping off again. People just need to know, though, with the pace is associated with that, so that's important to look at. When you are running, if you run a little faster, your cadence will be a little higher in general, right? And if you run a little slow, your cadence will be a little slower. So that could explain it, but that was, still on. But I think the big thing is how those power numbers match up to the paces, right? So 334 first 70 miles, 248 pace, averaging 624. And if you actually look at the early miles, you were 22, 25, 17, 16, 20, 17. So, very typically maybe calling that going out too fast, because those, 330, 330, 340, 338, 337, those are big power numbers when we figured that what you would be able to hold for the entire distance from a power perspective would be probably 320, and you did hold 329. So that's really good. That's, that's rare. But it's interesting when you look at those granular numbers, right? In terms of the one thing I actually didn't look at.
How about the vertical oscillation? Does that one tell much?
Yeah. So what happens with the vertical oscillation is the faster you go, the more you vertically oscillate. So you want to look inside of a pace range. So that's also important for people to look at. With vertical oscillation, the faster you run, the more you need to combat inertia and gravity, the higher you go, right? And so your ground contact, your vertical oscillation looks a little lower at the end, which would be a good thing, but I didn't do that same analysis. But what people need to know is that inside of a similar pace range, if your vertical oscillation starts to go up at the same pace, that means that you're starting to tighten up and that your stride length is starting to reduce. And so you're going a little higher with each step. And normally to compensate for that, you just have to move your rating up. So a lot of elite athletes, especially when they get hot, tend to move their cadence up because they tighten up that stride length. You just can't sustain that stride length. But, let me do a calculation while you guys are still talking here, and I'll just have a look at what actually happened with that cadence as well.
Yeah, while Bobby's doing that, I did want to bring up, again, transparency. It's not all a perfect buildup, and we did deal with one niggle we'll call it, or insult, and with your calf, dealing with that a little bit in the weeks leading up to Chicago, which it would have been perfect world that we had nothing going on. But I want people to understand that these things do happen. You dealt with it really well. And again, because you had done really good base building and protocol, I felt like it was certainly nothing structural. And it was something that we could actually get ahead of by the race day. But I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, because when I talked to you after the race, you told me something very interesting about your experience with that. So I'd like you to share that with people, Ryan.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. A couple weeks prior to the race, I did feel that we were doing some form drills, and I think I was hammering the ground a little too hard with my shoe off or something, and I ended up the next day feeling a little something going on, kind of tightness in the bottom of my foot, and maybe something acute going on in, I guess we kind of narrowed it down into the inside the soleus, maybe a little micro tear or something that was happening in there. So it didn't really stop me from continuing the training, but there was a couple workouts that I stopped a little short, and just to be on the safe side. And then Matt came up with the protocol to help me work through that. And we did a couple, a couple table time sessions where you massage it out, and then gave me that voodoo wrap to help. All that stuff was really great and helping with the recovery. But truth be told, like the last week leading up to the race, I didn't really do a lot of running. I just jumped on the bike, and instead of the kind of handful of short runs I had prescribed, I just emulated the same amount of time on my Peloton bike at home. And the day before the race, I had scheduled that the evening before, there was kind of a little shakeout run that I did do at my hotel on the treadmill. And I was disappointed to feel I felt it again. It made me pretty nervous that, the race day's tomorrow. I'm feeling this thing. And it was almost even magnified. Like after I stopped running, I could feel some throbbing going on in there. And I guess you're just so in tune with your body at that point that a little thing becomes magnified. You focus on it, you stress about it. So I went to bed the night before the race day, just really worried about, hey, things could just go real bad tomorrow. I could end up, having to just walk this thing in. I told my wife the morning of, I said, listen, I'm just going to go out and race hard, and hopefully I don't do any permanent damage. Like if this thing doesn't come together, I'm just going to push through it anyway. But luckily I showed up race, on the start line and started off, and I did not feel it one time. I felt that race morning, I felt great. And really even after the race, I have not felt it. So.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things there. I'll let, Bobby's got a great, I think, conversation ahead of mine about the challenge versus threat mindset, and also physiologically what can be going on. But I was able to put you through some tests where we knew it wasn't structural. So when we know it's not structural, I wasn't worried about any permanent damage. I want to be clear about that, because if you are worried about that, you should certainly go to a professional and make sure that it's nothing more than a niggle or an insult. Okay. But that being said, we also love that part of the story where you're able to just hit that challenge on race day. Your mind was completely focused on the race, and that heightened awareness the day before the race is completely normal and natural. And, I kind of even refer to that a lot of times as being that challenge or threat mindset, because you can feel threats coming on because you want to hit your goal and you care. And then of course on race day, it's very often that we're able to really just go with our best version of ourselves, but we are walking that line leading up into a race. You are an intense guy. So the form drill you mentioned earlier, things like that can happen. And you being an intense guy, I think you really turn that into a overload type of drill instead of just being sort of a fast and free drill that we intended. So was that an error? As a coach myself, I'll say, yeah, I'm going to keep that in mind, making sure that we are going into things like that sooner in your plan, so you have time to adjust and really to learn some of these movements. But it's oftentimes where we learn the most, right? That we do have these kind of experiences. So I love that you worked through it, and I love that you didn't even feel it on race day. So, it's a process and it's never perfect. That's the main thing I wanted to point out, so people understand that, geez, this happens to these guys too, not just happening to me, right? And so you're in good company, Ryan, because we've all been through that, and you did a great job managing it. Bobby, what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, so many thoughts, right? So I'll even start off right at the top saying when I first got to meet Ryan, he plucked this number of 245 out of thin air, right? And I had to play to that number, right? And we hadn't done the old 18 miler and then 5K as fast as you can afterwards. So even when we did that, I was kind of like a little bit relieved, because that indicated that his target time was aiming high, but at least it was in the ballpark, right? So you go through that process, and then you go, okay, the hyper awareness thing we know so well, right? And it's the hyper awareness thing is not something we want to move away from, right? Because we survived as a species when we worry about stuff. Okay, so it means you're paying attention, and you're paying attention to the right thing and doing the right things. All right, it's that interpretation. So it comes down to, again, that great sports psychological concept that comes from the world of regular psychology, right? There's what happened, and then there's what you're making it mean. And those are two very different things, right? So there's the facts, and then there's the interpretation. And so Ryan's response, right? I always compare the three responses you have in stressful situations. And I call it the rabbit, the deer, and the cat, right? So the rabbit will freeze. We'll just do nothing. We'll just sit there, right? And that produces a certain hormonal concoction that will lead to a certain outcome, right? And the deer will flee, right? It will take flight. It will run away from the danger, right? It's a good jumper. It's a good distance runner. It's got a lot of high speed, and its option is in trying to get out of that, right? Okay, and that's not a great option for an endurance event. Not a bad option for a marathon, but it's not a great option for the shorter stuff where the kind of combat mindset needs to come into it. I have an athlete going to do, Matt and I both have an athlete going to do Ironman Florida very soon, and she sent me her race plan. And in her race plan in T1, she's already talking about putting on her warrior garb, right? So she's getting ready to fight. And I said, no, it's too early. You have to still be an athlete. The whole bike ride, you have to be an athlete. You can't be fighting people. You can start fighting people in the last six miles of the run, right? So again, and then the cat, even if the cat gets a shock, right, the cat will leap up into the air. But in that leap, it will turn and face the danger. So it will be ready to fight no matter how much shock or how much danger is in that situation. So you can see yourself going through that whole gamut of things, right? So some athletes will say, I just don't want to tell Matt. I just don't want to tell Bobby, but I'm worried about my calf, right? That's the freeze mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the flight mentality, is like, okay, I'm going to just try not to think about it, right? And the fight mentality is, no, it's there. I know it's there. I'm going to be aware of it, but I'm still taking this damn thing on, right? And so that hormonal concoction feeds you, right? It's fascinating conversation to have, right? But not long ago, an Olympic athlete of mine was speaking to an Olympic champion, and she said, I just got this little niggle, and I just wish I didn't have any niggles. And the Olympic champion said, wait a minute, you'll always have a niggle. This is the reality of life. You're never going to go into an Olympic Games going, I'm niggle free. Everybody's got a niggle.
Right. That's funny.
I love that, Bobby, the way that you explain these things. I wrote that down, but you know, giving people these tools and these ways of understanding that it's not just them that goes through these things, right? And whether you're an age grouper or you're going for that world record, we often deal with the same types of experiences. We might have a different time we have set ahead of us, or we have a different process, but we're all going through similar things together. And I think it's so important to share those things. And Ryan, you handled that beautifully. It does remind me a little bit of, we'll have a whole podcast about this, guys, but with Chelsea Sodaro at Ironman World Championships, we did not have the day on the bike we wanted. She had the second fastest run of the day on the marathon, went all the way from 20th off the bike to 6th place. And I was so proud of her. I know that she considers this now to be her greatest race that she's done so far. She will win again. That'll happen. But I think being able to deal with these kind of experiences and realizing that on the day, I'm going to find the best version of myself, what I can etch out in a new experience, in a new cave for myself, that's what I think really transfers to the future as well. And that's in part what I know about you, is that you are going to realistically have a great progression to a sub 245, but most people are just not going to jump from an official 301 to an official sub 245 at 45 years old, right? So this is more realistic, what we're talking about, and you will get there. And this experience is partially why.
I think even the 253 was an unreasonable expectation in the best possible way of saying that, because 301 to 253, that's massive, right? I mean, people that when they break 3 hours for the first time, it's a little thing, right? It's 259 something. Anyway, so just to go back to us saying that there wasn't an explosion at 18 miles like you so often see. That's statistically shown that, people just don't have the training for the marathon to go beyond that 18-mile mark and hold on to these mythical goal paces that they choose. And so the vertical oscillation actually showed that quite nicely, right? So the average vertical oscillation for the whole run is 7.61, right? Average vertical oscillation for the first 17 miles, 7.63. But vertical oscillation for those last 6 miles, 7.5, right? So it just shows you how subtle that is, that you were staying on there. And then I just want people to know that one of the things that you get from the conditioning work that you've done is that ability to keep that cadence going, keep that stride length going, because those are factors of muscle endurance, being able to hold it together as you're falling apart, and all of your form numbers show that you were well conditioned for this race. That's okay. And then the other thing that points to that is your very, very rapid recovery. I sent you significant details right after the race saying this is what you can expect with your recovery, and you are beating all of those things, right? So you're not having the soreness and so on. You're not having that lack of energy, that sense of deflation, all of those things that you see. And you probably felt that despite the cold or the COVID, that you could probably go out running after a week, right? And most
absolutely,
people, need about
I'm itching
that.
to get back out there.
Okay.
I've been on the bike a few times, and it's like I'm getting antsy. I need to get out, and probably tomorrow I'll get back into running. We're heading. My family's headed to Disneyland tomorrow. We're gonna spend a long weekend there, and I'm already trying to plan in my mind, like, when am I gonna have a little time to sneak out for a run? So,
very good.
Can I ask, Bobby, in this case here, because I do want to wrap up my end with talking a little bit about what we're going to plan in the next progression with Ryan, but I do want to just review something important I think that you said after the marathon is to sort of take advantage of the physiological fitness that he's gained and to maintain a little bit more of that. And so the amount of volume that I think it's good to try to maintain after doing something like this, because in the past, Ryan has gone like all and then almost nothing, and we don't want to be on that roller coaster ride. And the other thing that I'll talk briefly about is that really Ryan is a real guy, a real person who has other goals in mind, and aesthetics do matter to Ryan as well to an extent. And we discussed this in the next phase. We are actually going to hit a bit more of an aesthetic phase so that Ryan can get himself a little bit more to the, I guess, those body shape goals that he's interested in. And that's not a bad thing. And it's important to recognize that. It's like, oh, it's almost blasphemy to talk to, Matt and Bobby about aesthetics when all we talk about is athletics. But that is a part of the reality of where we're all at, where we do care about those things as well, even when we have sub 245 goals. But, Bobby, what's your thoughts on this?
So firstly, I would take the word volume out and add the word duration, right? So what you're trying to do with a marathon runner, the last part of your conversation aside, is you want to get back, and in the case of an age group athlete, you want to establish something that is so easy to sustain, right? So if your nothing life, your average life is 40 miles a week, you'd like to make that 50 or 60 miles a week, right? So my nothing, not preparing for anything, is just my joy, is 60 miles a week, and whatever time that takes. But now remember, a lot of the running is going to be easier, right? And so you don't want to put a volume number on there. You want to put a time number on there,
Mhm.
So like some coaches, they use a fixed number, right? So Gwen's previous coach with Jerry, what's his name? Schumacher. He would go 8 minutes. 8 minutes is a mile, whether you're running 800 meters, whether you're running 1,500 meters or whether you're running 1,900 meters, which are a little bit less than a mile, a little bit more than a mile. We're looking at 8 minutes, right? And so that's the number that we would look at, right? And Ryan, with his background, is quite a high time number. He doesn't mind spending, an hour plus a day out there. So, if you get back to an average week of 7 hours a week where you are running, I think that's not a bad place to live at naturally, right? So there might be a 90-minute on the weekend, and there might be 50 minutes a day, and that kind of thing is what you look at. But you still want to bring in, okay, and one of those days I'm not going to run, and so that's the kind of thinking. So for me as a performance coach, and having been Ryan's coach for that 17 weeks, I would say the next goal, if the marathon is still foremost in his mind, is we need to bring his 10K down. And the reason why we need to bring his 10K down, because that's what was performance-wise missing in the early part of his training. Ryan literally went from doing LT work at the pace that he ended up being able to do in the marathon in the beginning. And normally what I would like to see is, oh no, that LT work is 10K work or 5 mile work or 8K work, right? And we didn't have the time to go and revisit that. We know that in week 13, 14, had we gone back to that kind of workout, he would have stood out, but that was the wrong time to do that. We would have seen what he would have been capable of. So I hope that answers your question in that regard, so that the next build would be restore to a baseline and then pick a nice quick 10K to build to, so that he gets confidence in that stride capacity that he has to cover 5 miles or to cover 10K really crisply and really quickly. And that will, as soon as you add the duration, it will bring the marathon into play. And that the 244.49 or 244.59, bring that into play. And the only thing then you need to do is back that with volume, because you don't have to worry that he doesn't have the actual comfort at that 6:20 pace.
Interesting. Yeah. And what Ryan and I discussed already was the first 3 weeks of his strength work is going to be a little bit more of accumulation. There's going to be more muscle soreness. And we talked about doing 5 hours a week, and you said 7 hours. First 3 weeks, I was looking at 5. We may look at how that adjusts for him, but I do look at his, his muscle soreness in a new phase like this. And quite honestly, again, with a little bit of an aesthetic goal there where we will be going lower carbohydrate, we will be looking at a different nutrition strategy with him. And so all interesting to keep in mind, guys, when you're starting new programs. And what Bobby said, I think, is really crucial there is based off of your baseline and what you're used to. And then if you're introducing something new like accumulation work and the strength training side of things, then there are adjustments for that as well. But I see us getting into that 7 hours after we've done a few weeks of his accumulation training in the strength room, which will take the front seat for the first few weeks, if that makes sense, guys.
Yeah, and not hard and fast either, right? That 7 was a give you an example based on Ryan's average running speed, and then also there's that recovery, right? So if he's struggling to keep up nutritionally and stuff like that because that's just too much work, then you reconsider that. And then of course you can throw in like he could spend more time out there because he's hiking, right? And that kind of play. And as we spoke about before the call, we had that concept about how would we strengthen him up towards the end of the race. And so, but that's a talk for another call, for another podcast.
Yeah, perfect. In closing, Ryan, anything that you would like to finish with here?
No, I'd like to thank both of you guys for all your effort and all your wisdom that you poured into me over the last 17 weeks. And it was an honor and a privilege to work with both of you guys. And Matt, I'm looking forward to continuing. And like you said, getting focused on maybe more the aesthetics for a little bit. But, Bobby, I'll be back, and hopefully you'll be willing to work with me again. I think I still have some goals left in me. So, but thank you guys. I appreciate it.
You didn't hit your target time. I can't possibly work with you again. Of course, Ryan, it was wonderful. You are eminently coachable. It was so much fun working with you, and your ability to take on the coaching, but at the same time be vulnerable and say, look, this is not doable, and your work-life balance ethic is admirable. Is really admirable. You like, this is my wife's time. This is my kids' time. I've got these games that my kids that are playing that I want to go to. I'm taking my wife to Vegas, and so this will have to adjust. That is actually very admirable. That those are the kind of things you hear from a person who will be able to be still running marathons when you're in your 60s and your 70s because of that approach. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to just throw a quick shout out to Billy Haug before we get off, because Billy was an athlete that I worked with in high school. He was really getting quite fast. He had some goals of running in college. He was hit by a person texting and driving. He was on foot. He almost lost his leg. They almost amputated it. You skip all these years ahead, he was at the Chicago Marathon as well. And he was able to manage, keep in mind he's younger as well, but he ran 2:43. I'm very proud of Billy for that process. Another person would be great to have him on talking about his experience, a completely different experience, but big shout out to him, a person that doctors told him he would never run again. And he's all about proving people wrong. And I'd also like to say, Ryan, you deserve one more little bit of credit here. Just last night, I met with a guy who used to be ranked 3rd in the world for boxing. He came in and said, I've got this big pain in my foot. It was basically just a very quick adjustment that we had to make for an aroma. And I thought, I could have told you this over the phone. And he said, well, like I bumped into Ryan and so he's training for this Chicago, and he's doing all these things, and he's busy like I am. He's a desk jockey too. And it ended up being that really he was there because he wants to go after a marathon or maybe even an Ironman. So you see, you're inspiring even guys like that to really realize there's a lot more they can do in in their lives, and his athletic career isn't over. It's just a different story. And so you see, you're inspiring all kinds of people. You guys, I believe, get your haircut in the same place, and he bumped into. And so that's really, I think, why they were there last night. So that was kind of fun and interesting. And we'll get him going for his marathon next.
That's great. Maybe I'll get a chance to work out with him a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd love that. You two are both so crazy. I don't know if I can put you together. That you'll destroy each other.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much,
Right.
and appreciate all the experience that you've shared with us, Ryan. It's been a true honor, pleasure to work for you, and I look forward to the future where we make a good team. And Bobby, thanks so much. I know Ryan and I are already talking about how we can team up together again for next year. So let's get after it.
Yeah, and when you do those aesthetics and things, don't move too far away from your RunFORM stuff. That's your classic. That's your standby. It's your meat and potatoes right there.
You got it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
As always, thanks for listening to the RunFORM podcast. And as a reminder, we offer a totally free movement improvement assessment on our Pendola Project website. Here, you can get your own personalized protocol that will help your running today. So give that a try. Also, Bobby and I are experts on Any Question app, where you can ask us, any question. So reach out to us directly there. Finally, if you learned anything new today, don't forget to share it with your compadres and leave us a quick review. That really helps us a lot. All the links you need are in the show notes below. Till next time, have a great run. Oh, that was awesome. Yeah.